Hey guys, welcome back to Cruise Blog. It's Allie and 'tis the season for hurricanes. We're going to be talking today about what happens if there is a hurricane during your cruise so that you can be more prepared for if this happens to you. Let's get into it. What happens if your cruise crosses paths with a hurricane? Well, thankfully, the chances of you coming face to face with a monster storm are minimal. In the days leading up to a sailing, cruise lines will monitor the weather and make any necessary changes to the itinerary, keeping passengers and crew out of harm's way. While those cruising to Alaska or the Mediterranean don't have to worry about a disturbance developing into a major hurricane and derailing their travel plans, the Bahamas and the Caribbean are hotspots for hurricane activity, especially during the peak months of the Atlantic hurricane season. It's common to hear of cruise lines adjusting itineraries during hurricane season. If a powerful storm is expected to pass through the Western Caribbean, a ship initially scheduled to visit Mexico may call at St. Martin and St. Thomas instead. Similarly, a cruise to Bermuda could be rerouted to New England or the Caribbean to avoid the path of an approaching storm. So when exactly is hurricane season? While a hurricane or tropical storm can develop in the Atlantic year-round, about 97% of storms occur between June 1st and November 30th, according to the National Hurricane Center. The peak of the Atlantic hurricane season is mid-August to mid-October. However, that should not deter you from booking a cruise during that time, as cruise lines don't reduce their sailing to the Bahamas and the Caribbean. Instead, you'll find various itineraries ranging from short 3-night getaways to the Bahamas to more port-intensive voyages to the Southern Caribbean. Though there's an average of 14 named storms annually, only a few percentage of cruises are actually impacted. If yours is one of them, you can rest easy knowing that no cruise line will sail you into danger. Storms sailing through the Windward Islands won't impact Western Caribbean ports like Cozumel, Mexico, and Roatan, Honduras. Hurricane-force winds from large storms can extend around 150 miles from its center, so given that most cruise ships sail around 18 to 22 knots per hour, it's very easy for ships to navigate away from adverse weather. While it's impossible to predict when and where a hurricane will occur, the southern Caribbean islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao are the least likely to be impacted as they fall outside the typical hurricane belt. Of course, the safety of passengers and crew is the cruise line's top priority. As mentioned earlier, it's unlikely that you'll ever sail through the eye of a hurricane. Why? Because cruise lines spring into action when there's even the slightest disturbance. Thanks to forecasters, cruise lines and meteorologists have an idea of the storm's path days in advance, and that gives ships ample time to move out of harm's way. Rather than risk thousands of lives, they will first try and find an alternative route, which is why booking a cruise for a single port of call is risky. Recently, for instance, at least 10 cruise ships had their itineraries changed at the last minute due to Hurricane Beryl. Norwegian Jade was one. Rather than sailing to the Western Caribbean, the ship was rerouted to San Juan, Tortola, and Puerto Plata. If for whatever reason your embarkation port is scheduled to be impacted, they may delay the departure or, in extreme cases, cancel your sailing. The latter, however, is very rare. As much as you want your cruise to happen, cruise lines do not want to deal with issuing refunds and future cruise certificates for canceled sailings. However, if your itinerary changes, you should know that you aren't entitled to any compensation. Don't expect a refund or credit applied to your onboard account if your itinerary is altered due to weather. According to Section 8D of Carnival's cruise contract, Carnival shall have no liability for any compensation or other damages in such circumstances for any change in itinerary, port of call, ports of embarkation and debarkation, and or duration of the cruise, including a longer than planned duration of the cruise due to port closings. Sometimes a cruise line will offer onboard credit if a port of call is canceled and no substitute is provided, adding an unexpected extra sea day to the sailing. If the cruise was shortened due to weather, you may receive a prorated refund for lost days. Similarly, if a cruise line decides to extend the voyage to avoid a storm, you typically won't be charged anything extra. However, you will be responsible for onboard expenses like your alcoholic purchases or your spa treatments. Additionally, if you decide to cancel the trip out of uncertainty, you won't be issued a refund. Some travel insurance policies allow passengers to cancel for any reason. However, it's important to read the terms and conditions before not showing up at the terminal on your cruise departure's date. We also suggest that you give yourself plenty of time to travel to your embarkation port. Adverse weather tends to wreak havoc on the already fragile air travel system. Flying out at least the day before your cruise gives you time to make alternative arrangements should your flight be canceled. Perhaps you can scramble and book with another airline or reserve a rental car. Flying on the day of your sailing leaves very little wiggle room for delays. In the days leading up to your cruise, keep an eye on the weather. Hurricanes do not magically appear. Instead, they develop over a few days. So if you're worried about transportation, you can always contact your airline and see if there's an earlier flight available. Those driving may decide to leave a day earlier than planned as well. But before assuming the worst and canceling your flights, wait for information from your cruise line. Likely your cruise will depart as planned. However, the ports might be different than those on your original itinerary. Either way, cruise lines will do everything to ensure you have a great time on board. When sailing during hurricane season, you must remain flexible. If you receive an email from the cruise line advising of a shortened voyage, they will typically allow you to cancel for future cruise credit. Sometimes you can move to a different sailing free of charge as well. The cruise line's offer will be explicitly stated in the email they send you. There's no standard hurricane refund policy, so it's important to read all communications in their entirety. If you're given a choice, letting the cruise line know how you wish to proceed is important, as you will not be automatically bumped from the cruise unless it's outright canceled. If you want to cancel and simply do not show up, you won't be given a refund. Instead, your reservation will be treated as a no-show. Those booked with a travel agent should inform them of their decision. They'll take care of letting the cruise line know. So what should you know about gearing up for a very active hurricane season? In April, Colorado State University released its 2024 forecast predicting 23 named storms, 11 of which are anticipated to become hurricanes. Similarly, the NOAA is forecasting a range of 17 to 25 total named storms, with anywhere from 8 to 13 becoming hurricanes. Chief meteorologists and certified consulting meteorologists shared a simulation of their team prepping for a rapidly developing storm. This year's simulation was with a storm that rapidly intensifies as it approaches southern Florida. This approach is entirely possible and has happened before in history. Most folks think we will have days and days to watch and prepare. The caveat here was that this system began developing within 3 days of reaching Miami, putting everyone behind the planning curve from the beginning, is what he posted. All right, everybody, that's what you can expect if you encounter a hurricane or storm during your cruise. Comment below if you've ever been impacted by a hurricane or a storm, or maybe if you've avoided a hurricane while on a cruise ship before. Thanks for tuning in today, and be sure and like and subscribe to Cruise Blog so that you can be notified every time we have a new video. Until next time, this has been Allie, and happy cruising.